Welcome to the War Archive, where wars become stories. The year is 1807, and Europe lies beneath the shadow of one man. Napoleon Bonaparte, soldier, lawgiver, emperor, has subdued nearly every major power on the continent. Austria and Prussia have been humbled. Russia, once an implacable foe, now stands as his uneasy ally. The emperor's map of Europe looks almost complete. Only one island nation remains beyond his grasp: Great Britain. Across the cold waters of the Channel, Britain endures, its economy thriving, its fleet unconquered. To destroy it, Napoleon devises a new kind of war, not with cannons and sabers, but with ledgers and blockades. Thus is born the continental system, an audacious economic siege. Every port, every ally, every puppet kingdom across Europe is ordered to close its markets to British goods. Napoleon imagines Britain strangled by isolation, her trade collapsing, her government forced to beg for peace. But where armies can march in step, merchants often drift astray. Smugglers and neutral traders keep commerce alive, slipping through the cracks of the emperor's embargo. And nowhere are those cracks wider than in the west, along the coast of Portugal. Portugal, an ancient ally of Britain, refuses to break the friendship that has endured since the Middle Ages. Its wine still flows to London. British ships still find refuge in Lisbon's harbor. To Napoleon, this defiance is intolerable, a wound in the body of his empire. He resolves to seal it swiftly and ruthlessly. An army will march through Spain, his nominal ally, and occupy Portugal in the name of the continental system. Officially, it is cooperation. In truth, it is conquest. The invasion is placed under the command of General Jean-Audacious Junot, a veteran of Napoleon's lightning campaigns. In the autumn of 1807, Junot leads 25,000 men across the Pyrenees and into Iberia. Spain, bound by alliance, opens its roads to the French columns. Yet behind the handshakes and ceremony, Napoleon's mind is already turning. He sees Spain not as a partner, but as the next piece on his chessboard. The Bourbon monarchy there is decadent, corrupt, and divided, the perfect prey for his ambitions. As Junot's troops push toward Lisbon, they carry with them more than muskets and banners. They carry the weight of empire. The road to Portugal will soon lead to something far greater: the unraveling of Napoleon's dream of total control. The seeds of rebellion are already buried in Iberian soil, and when they bloom, they will bleed. Spain, Napoleon's so-called ally, is a kingdom rotting from the inside. Its throne, occupied by King Carlos IV, stands at the mercy of intrigue and vanity. The king's energy has long been drained by the ceaseless feuding of his own family. His son, Prince Ferdinand, despises him, and despises even more the man who truly rules Spain, Manuel Godoy, the king's favorite and the queen's lover. Godoy, a peasant elevated by charm and cunning, has amassed immense power and privilege. Yet in the eyes of Spain's nobles and clergy, he is a disgrace, the living symbol of corruption and moral decay. From his palace in Paris, Napoleon observes this circus with contempt. To him, Spain is a hollow carcass, a once mighty empire now sinking into superstition and incompetence. Its armies are ill-trained, its coffers empty, its rulers consumed by vanity. In a world governed by power, such weakness is an invitation. If Spain could be persuaded or forced to serve as a French vassal, the whole Iberian Peninsula would fall neatly under his control. And through Iberia, he could strike Britain where it still bled silver, in the Atlantic trade routes and the colonies of the New World. The facade of alliance continues for appearance's sake. Spanish ministers flatter Napoleon, hoping to preserve their fragile prestige, while French envoys assure them of friendship. But beneath the polite words lies calculation. In secret correspondence, Napoleon refers to the Spanish monarchy as imbeciles ruled by a lover, and begins plotting how to replace them. To prepare the ground, he orders French troops to reinforce Junot's columns under the pretext of aiding the Portuguese campaign. Once in motion, those troops will not stop at Lisbon. They will seep into Spain itself. As 1807 turns to 1808, the Spanish people sense that something is amiss. French garrisons settle into their towns and fortresses, claiming to be protectors against British raids. French officers dine at the tables of Spanish nobles, praising friendship while mapping their estates. The alliance that once promised safety now feels like a slow tightening noose. In the palace of Aranjuez, whispers spread of French betrayal, of secret treaties, and plots signed behind the king's back. When the truth surfaces that Napoleon's forces occupy Spain not as allies, but as masters, the people's anger ignites. They blame Godoy, whose arrogance and greed have delivered the country into foreign hands. Crowds surround his residence, smashing gates, setting fires, dragging the disgraced favorite into the streets. The riot of Aranjuez shakes the monarchy to its core. Carlos IV, terrified and broken, abdicates in favor of his son Ferdinand. The court collapses into chaos, and in the shadows of Bailen, Napoleon smiles. The time to strike Spain directly has come. In the spring of 1808, French troops marched deeper into Spain under a banner of friendship. Their orders claimed they were there to protect the kingdom from British invasion, but the true enemy was already inside. Regiment by regiment, France occupied Spain's key fortresses, Pamplona, Barcelona, Burgos, without firing a shot. Spanish officials offered toasts, French generals drew maps. The land of El Cid was becoming a silent battlefield before a single musket cracked. Napoleon's plan was a masterpiece of deceit. He knew Spain's court was fractured beyond repair, and he would use that division to dismantle it entirely. As the French presence expanded, his marshals quietly took control of supply lines, fortifications, and arsenals. Each garrison became a nail driven into Spain's sovereignty. Yet Madrid still pretended to believe the emperor's assurances of alliance. Only a few dared to whisper that the French had come not as guests, but as conquerors in uniform. Meanwhile, the Spanish royal family tore itself apart. Ferdinand, hailed by the people as a symbol of renewal, plotted to overthrow his father. King Carlos IV, manipulated by Godoy, sought help from the only man powerful enough to settle the dispute, Napoleon himself. The emperor invited them all to the French border town of Bayonne, offering mediation. In truth, it was a gilded cage. While Spain's rulers bickered in exile, Murat's French army entered Madrid to restore order. The Spanish people could sense the mask slipping. In taverns and markets, rumors spread that their king had been betrayed, their crown stolen. French soldiers strutted through Spanish streets as if they owned them. Their arrogance stoked old resentments. A nation already wounded by misrule was now insulted by occupation. The air in Madrid grew tense, like a storm building behind shuttered windows. At the royal palace in Aranjuez, the humiliation reached its breaking point. Godoy, the man once called Prince of Peace, became the lightning rod for Spain's fury. The mob came howling for him, nobles, peasants, soldiers alike, smashing through the palace gates, dragging him out in bloodied linen. As he begged for mercy, the crowd spat his name like a curse. With Godoy destroyed and the old king in despair, Ferdinand seized the throne. For the first time, it seemed Spain might reclaim its dignity. But in truth, the kingdom had merely exchanged one master for another. The stage was now set for open rebellion and for the blood-soaked uprising that would change Europe forever. Dawn breaks on the 2nd of May, 1808, and Madrid stirs to the sound of foreign drums. Murat's soldiers, 50,000 strong, march through the streets with polished muskets and cold eyes, their bayonets glinting in the early light. French banners hang over the royal palace, where whispers spread that the last members of Spain's royal family are to be taken north to France. To a city humiliated and restless, it is the final insult. The people will tolerate no more. What begins as shouting outside the palace gates turns into chaos. Crowds surge forward, men, women, apprentices, monks, armed with whatever they can find, cobblestones, knives, kitchen tools, even scissors. Murat's cavalry charge into the masses, sabers flashing. But the people fight like cornered wolves. On the Puerta del Sol, French Mamelukes, exotic horsemen from Egypt in bright turbans, are dragged from their saddles and hacked apart by a mob screaming for vengeance. The uprising spreads like wildfire across the capital. For hours, the city becomes a maze of blood and smoke. Bells toll from every church tower, calling the faithful to arms. Musket fire echoes through narrow streets. Barricades rise from overturned carts. A boy barely 16 stands beside a priest, reloading his musket as fast as trembling hands will allow. Murat's disciplined columns respond with methodical fury, bayonet charges into alleys, cannon fire across plazas. By nightfall, Madrid is a graveyard of shattered glass and smoldering stone. The reprisals are merciless. Murat orders the firing squads to begin. At dawn on May 3rd, groups of captured Spaniards are marched to the walls outside the city and executed under the pale morning sky. Some pray, others stare defiantly at their killers. French muskets crack in unison, their smoke drifting over the corpses. One man who witnesses the slaughter will never forget it, Francisco Goya. His brush will later capture this horror in the 3rd of May, 1808, a frozen scream of humanity against the machine of empire. By the time the guns fall silent, 1,000 Spaniards are dead. But the cost to France will be far greater. The uprising of Madrid is no isolated riot. It is the spark of something vast and uncontrollable. Across Spain, towns and villages rise up in answer, their cry echoing through mountains and plains. Viva España! Muerte a los franceses! In trying to cage a kingdom, Napoleon has unleashed a nation. While Madrid drowns in blood, the real execution takes place hundreds of miles away, in the quiet French town of Bailen. There, behind the polished doors of a borrowed chateau, Napoleon performs a masterstroke of manipulation. The Spanish royal family, broken by scandal and rebellion, has been lured into his grasp under the guise of protection. Now, one by one, he will strip them of their crown. King Carlos IV, terrified by the riot at Aranjuez and the fury of his own people, pleads for Napoleon's help. His son, Ferdinand VII, demands recognition as the new ruler. Napoleon listens patiently to both, smiling, sympathetic, fatherly. Then, with the skill of a lawyer and the ruthlessness of a conqueror, he dismantles them. Before the assembled courtiers, he declares the Spanish monarchy defunct, a house divided and unworthy of rule. Under his watchful gaze, father and son are forced to abdicate. Their signature seals the end of Spain's ancient dynasty. In their place, Napoleon appoints his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as the new king of Spain. The emperor insists this is not conquest, but regeneration. France will bring enlightenment, order, and reform. A modern constitution is drafted, promising liberty, education, and equality before the law. Yet for the people of Spain, these fine words carry the stench of blasphemy. The French Revolution had guillotined kings and defied the Pope. Now its ideas march south in the uniforms of foreign soldiers. To a deeply Catholic nation, Napoleon's promise of progress feels like sacrilege. Priests thunder from their pulpits that the Antichrist himself now sits upon Spain's throne. Bonaparte's tricolor is cursed as the banner of Satan. Across the countryside, peasants clutch crucifixes and sharpen knives. Families bury their silver, burn official documents, and swear oaths never to bow to a French king. Every church bell that tolls becomes a call to resistance. When Joseph enters Madrid that summer, the city greets him with silence. Curtains are drawn, streets deserted, balconies draped in black. French officers boast of bringing civilization to a backward people, but even they can sense the hatred beneath the calm. The emperor's grand experiment in political theater has succeeded on paper, but outside the palace gates, a different kind of revolution is already gathering. It is not written in constitutions or decrees. It is whispered in prayers, planned in taverns, and soon it will erupt in fire. What begins as scattered outrage soon ignites into something the world has never seen. A war waged not by armies, but by an entire people. From the rugged hills of Galicia to the olive groves of Andalusia, Spain rises in fury. Peasants, priests, noblemen, and beggars alike take up arms against the French invader. They fight with anything they can find: rusted muskets, hunting knives, pitchforks, and faith. For centuries, Spain's identity had been rooted in faith and pride. Now, both become weapons. The rebellion spreads faster than any general can control. In one province, French patrols vanish without a trace. In another, couriers are found hanging from trees, their dispatches nailed to their chests. French convoys are ambushed on narrow roads, supplies looted, officers stripped and left to die in ravines. The countryside itself turns hostile. Bridges collapse mysteriously. Guides lead columns into dead ends. Wells are poisoned. This is the birth of guerrilla warfare, a term the French themselves coined from the Spanish guerra pequeña, the little war. But in truth, it is not little at all. To crush the uprising, French marshals unleash terror in return. Villages suspected of harboring rebels are burned to ash. Prisoners are executed in rows. Yet every act of vengeance only deepens the hatred. Priests declare the dead martyrs. Widows turn smugglers. Farmers become killers by night. Napoleon's empire, built on discipline and reason, now finds itself fighting ghosts. The front line has dissolved into every valley, every street, every home. Among those who witness the horror is Francisco Goya, once a court painter to kings, now an unwilling chronicler of madness. His sketches, later published as The Disasters of War, reveal the truth the official reports conceal. Women bayoneted, monks hanged, children left in fields beside their parents' corpses. Through his eyes, Europe sees that this is no ordinary rebellion but a moral earthquake. For the first time, the French army, the same that had crushed coalitions from Italy to Prussia, finds itself fighting an enemy it cannot see, cannot reason with, and cannot defeat. Spain has no central command, no formal strategy. It bleeds, it burns, and it endures. In their arrogance, the conquerors have mistaken silence for surrender. Now, every silent village hides a knife. Every priest's sermon becomes a call to war. And as the fires of resistance spread, the French discover that the soul of a nation cannot be conquered by force alone. At first, it seems that France will drown this uprising in its own blood. The Grande Armée moves with mechanical precision, advancing across Spain like an iron tide. French columns besiege Girona, Valencia, and Zaragoza, pounding ancient walls with modern artillery. Everywhere the tricolor rises over captured towns. To Napoleon's marshals, victory appears inevitable. They are veterans of Austerlitz and Jena, men who have shattered Europe's finest armies. Spain, poor and disorganized, looks destined to fall in weeks. But Spain is no ordinary battlefield. In Zaragoza, civilians fight from windows and rooftops, nuns carrying gunpowder through the smoke. At Girona, citizens dig trenches with bare hands while priests bless the cannons. The French win ground, but at a price. For every wall they take, 100 new rebels emerge in the hills. Napoleon's empire, forged on order, now meets chaos itself. Then, in July 1808, comes the shock. General Dupont, leading 3 French divisions through the baking plains of Andalusia, has grown complacent. His wagons creak under the weight of looted silver and church relics, his men sluggish in the heat. Near the town of Bailen, he finds his path blocked by General Castaños and the Spanish army of Andalusia. It is meant to be a skirmish, a minor delay. Instead, it becomes a nightmare. For 3 blistering days, the two forces clash beneath the sun. The French, parched and exhausted, fight bravely but are encircled. Their gunpowder runs low, their water barrels run dry. Castaños tightens the noose, his lines swelling with local militias eager for vengeance. Finally, Dupont surrenders. An entire corps, 18,000 men, stacking their muskets in the dust. Half will die later in captivity from hunger and disease. For the first time in a decade, a French army has been utterly destroyed. News of Bailen explodes across Europe like thunder. In Vienna and Berlin, men whisper that the French can be beaten after all. In London, church bells ring. And in Madrid, people pour into the streets shouting, "Bailen, Bailen," the name itself a hymn of defiance. Napoleon, upon hearing of the defeat, rages in disbelief. Since becoming emperor, he has never lost an army. Now, at the hands of Spanish peasants and priests, he suffers humiliation. The fall of Dupont's army cracks the illusion of invincibility that held Europe in awe. Joseph Bonaparte, the puppet king, flees Madrid in panic, abandoning his throne to the rebels. French garrisons withdraw northward, their confidence shattered. Across the continent, rulers begin to wonder, If Spain can resist the emperor of the world, perhaps they can too. What began as an occupation has become a contagion of rebellion, and Napoleon, for the first time, must reckon with an enemy he cannot intimidate. Across the Channel, Britain watches the chaos with growing interest. The Iberian Peninsula, once a distant frontier, now offers a perfect stage to strike at Napoleon's empire. The Royal Navy rules the seas, but Britain has long lacked a foothold on the continent. Now, Spain's revolt and Portugal's defiance open a door, and London is determined to march through it. In the summer of 1808, a small but professional British army sails for Portugal under Sir Arthur Wellesley, a relatively unknown general, but one of sharp discipline and colder patience. His task is simple on paper: support the Portuguese resistance and push the French out. Yet beneath that modest goal lies something far larger: the first test of Britain's ability to challenge Napoleon's armies on land. Wellesley's troops land on Portuguese beaches beneath the roar of naval cannon, greeted by crowds waving flags and crucifixes. His army is small, barely 15,000 men, but trained and drilled to perfection. On August 17th, near the village of Relisa, Wellesley meets the first French detachment. He fights with precision, maneuvering his troops through ravines and hills, cutting off the enemy's retreat. The French withdraw, bloodied and bewildered. 4 days later, at Vimero, the main battle is joined. There, Wellesley faces General Junot, the same man who had marched into Portugal with triumph less than a year before. Under a scorching sun, British redcoats form ranks on the high ground as French columns advance in the classic style of Napoleon's wars: bold, disciplined, and unstoppable. But this time, they meet something new: a line of British muskets that fires in perfect rhythm, volley after volley, tearing the French ranks apart. Junot's assaults crumble under the smoke and thunder. By afternoon, his army is in retreat, leaving the field and its pride behind. Yet even victory can taste bitter. Before Wellesley can pursue, his newly arrived superiors, Sir Hugh Dalrymple and Sir Harry Berard, intervene. Older, cautious, and fearful of overextending, they negotiate the Convention of Sintra with the defeated French. Its terms are astonishing. Junot and his entire army, with all their weapons, baggage, and even plunder, will be repatriated safely to France aboard British ships. London erupts in outrage. The public calls it a disgrace. Newspapers howl that British valor has been bartered for humiliation. A formal inquiry will later clear Wellesley of blame, but his reputation is already made. In defeat disguised as victory, he has shown the qualities that will soon define him: discipline, clarity, and unyielding purpose. For the French, however, the message is unmistakable. A new enemy has entered the war, one with the money, the fleet, and now the will to fight. On the battlefields of Iberia, Britain has found its foothold, and Napoleon has found a wound that will never heal. Napoleon can bear humiliation from no one, least of all from amateurs and rebels. The disaster at Bailen and the loss of Portugal shake his empire's prestige to its core. He blames his marshals for cowardice, his brother Joseph for weakness, and his enemies for ingratitude. But beneath the fury lies cold resolve. If Spain is to be pacified, he will do it himself. No subordinates, no excuses, only the emperor. In the autumn of 1808, Napoleon gathers one of the largest armies he has ever commanded in person: 130,000 men, many of them veterans from Austerlitz, Friedland, and Jena. These are the steel heart of the Grande Armée, the soldiers who have marched from the Danube to the Niemen and never known defeat. They cross the Pyrenees like a rolling storm, their eagles flashing in the sunlight, their drums echoing through the mountain passes. Civilians along the road whisper in awe and terror. The emperor himself is coming. Spain has no army capable of resisting such force. The scattered juntas and regional militias fight bravely, but without unity, without strategy. Napoleon's marshals, Lannes, Soult, Ney, Victor, drive them back in coordinated assaults that recall the emperor's finest days. At Burgos and Tudela, the French annihilate Spanish field armies in a matter of hours. At Tudela, Marshal Lannes avenges Bailen by crushing General Castaños, the same commander who once humiliated Dupont. Spanish formations disintegrate, their banners torn, their cannons abandoned. The emperor rides at the head of his column, cloak snapping in the wind, his face unreadable. He surveys the burning towns and shattered armies with grim satisfaction. Each victory restores a piece of his pride, but something darker stirs beneath the triumph. The Spanish do not fight like the soldiers of Prussia or Austria. They melt away only to strike again from behind, an endless swarm of shadows. Every road his army clears becomes a battlefield once more by nightfall. Still, momentum is his ally. The French advance unrelenting toward Madrid, the rebel capital and symbol of defiance. Napoleon's proclamations promise peace, reform, and prosperity to any Spaniard who submits, yet his soldiers' bayonets speak another language. Cities that resist are looted. Villages that aid the guerrillas are burned to the ground. As his army storms across the Ebro and over the plains of Castile, even his marshals begin to whisper, "This is not a campaign, it is a curse." By December, the path to the capital lies open. Before him stands only one barrier, the mountain pass of Somosierra, guarded by a few thousand Spaniards and a battery of guns. Beyond it, the road to Madrid and to the illusion of control awaits. Napoleon, impatient as ever, decides he will break the pass by sheer will alone. What happens next will become legend. The wind howls through the Somosierra Pass, cutting through the peaks of the Sierra de Guadarrama like a blade. It is December 1808, and the snow lies thick upon the ground. Ahead of Napoleon's column, the narrow mountain road twists upward, blocked by a chain of Spanish batteries guarding the heights. 8,000 men, infantry, gunners, and irregulars, stand between the emperor and Madrid. The French advance falters. Cannonballs crash down from above, splintering trees and men alike. For hours, the Grande Armée hesitates in the frozen gorge. Napoleon's patience runs thin. He rides forward through the smoke, his horse slipping on ice, his staff trailing behind. "We'll see whether my Poles are worthy of their reputation," he mutters, turning to the Polish light horse of the Imperial Guard, his most fearless cavalry. The order is as mad as it is simple. Charge the guns head on. Even his marshals protest. It's suicide. But the emperor's will is law. The Poles form ranks, their lances glittering in the pale light, and without a word, they surge up the slope into hell. The charge is chaos made flesh. Cannon fire tears through the leading squadrons, horses tumble, and men scream, but the survivors do not stop. They slash through the first battery, seize the guns, and ride on, their momentum unstoppable. A second, then a third position falls beneath the storm of hooves. Smoke, snow, and blood blend into one roaring blur. By the time they reach the summit, only a handful remain, their uniforms soaked crimson, but the pass is theirs. The French infantry, inspired by the sight, pour upward behind them. Somosierra has fallen. Napoleon dismounts at the top and surveys the carnage in silence. Around him lie the bodies of hundreds of Poles, the ground churned and red. Even he who has seen the fields of Austerlitz and Eylau is moved. "Brave men," he whispers, "they are worthy of my old guard." The legend of Somosierra will echo across Europe, an act of suicidal valor that opens the road to Madrid. 4 days later, on December 4th, the French army surrounds the capital. The emperor sends a message to the city: surrender or be destroyed. For 2 days, Madrid holds its breath. Behind closed doors, priests bless the defenders, mothers hide their children, and French batteries prepare to fire. Then, facing annihilation, the city opens its gates. Napoleon enters Madrid not as a liberator, but as a conqueror cloaked in triumph and shadow. Inside the palace, he installs his brother Joseph, once again, issuing proclamations of peace and clemency. But the words ring hollow. Outside the capital, Spain still burns. In the mountains and the villages, the guerrillas sharpen their knives. The emperor has taken Madrid, but he has not taken Spain. The road behind him is paved with victories. The road ahead leads only deeper into a war that no genius can control. While Madrid bows beneath the imperial eagle, a new threat quietly advances from the west. The British, determined not to abandon the Iberian cause, send a fresh expedition under Sir John Moore, a disciplined and thoughtful commander who understands the gravity of his task. His army, 20,000 strong, lands in Portugal and begins a grueling march north into Spain, braving frost, mud, and endless mountains. They arrive in Salamanca, weary but resolute, just as the French tighten their grip on the heart of the country. Moore faces a terrible choice. The Spanish armies have been shattered. Napoleon's main force now occupies Madrid with overwhelming strength. To retreat would be prudent, but also shameful. So Moore conceives a bold plan. He will strike at the emperor's own communications, threatening to cut Napoleon off from France. To the north, Marshal Soult's Second Corps sits isolated near Burgos. If Moore can destroy it, he might draw Napoleon away from Madrid and relieve the pressure on Spain's resistance. It is a gamble that only courage or desperation could justify. On December 21, 1808, at the village of Sahagún, Moore's vanguard seizes its moment. Under cover of freezing darkness, the 15th Hussars advance across the frost-bitten plains. At dawn, they fall upon a French cavalry brigade, sabers flashing in the weak winter sun. The French line breaks instantly. The Hussars ride them down in a single, roaring charge, one of the finest in British cavalry history. Morale soars. For a fleeting moment, it seems as though the tide of the Peninsular War has turned, but fate moves faster than victory. As Moore prepares to attack Soult in full, chilling news reaches him. Napoleon himself is coming north, bringing the entire Grande Armée with him. More than 60,000 men, hardened veterans of Austerlitz, are marching straight toward the British. The emperor means to crush Moore between his own main army and Soult's corps in a colossal pincer movement. The gamble has failed. To stand and fight would be suicide. There is only one option left: retreat. For Moore's men, the order feels like betrayal. After weeks of marching and sacrifice, they must now turn their backs on Spain. But the general knows what he is doing. If his army can lure Napoleon away from Madrid, Spain's resistance will have time to breathe. Moore's retreat is not surrender. It is strategy. As snow begins to fall across the Castilian plains, the British pack their gear and move north, their faces set against the wind. Behind them, the greatest army in Europe is closing in, its banners black against the blizzard sky. The chase that follows will become one of the most harrowing retreats in military history, an odyssey of endurance, skill, and sacrifice. And in the frozen passes ahead, the legend of the 95th Rifles will be born. The retreat begins in a storm. Napoleon, eager for a decisive blow, drives his men through the Guadarrama Pass, a frozen wilderness of sleet and snow. His marshals beg him to halt. Even horses collapse from the cold. But the emperor presses on, wrapped in his gray overcoat, face set like iron. The Grande Armée, forged for glory, now marches through blizzards in pursuit of an army that refuses to stand still. For the French, it is supposed to be another victory. For the British, it becomes a desperate race against annihilation. Sir John Moore's troops slog through mountain mud and snow, their boots rotting, their supplies dwindling. Many soldiers stumble barefoot, leaving bloody footprints in the frost. Starvation and exhaustion gnaw at discipline. Wagons overturn, and the weak are left behind to die. Yet, amid the chaos, one part of the army holds firm, the rearguard, commanded by General Paget. Here, order survives through sheer defiance. They fight, retreat, and fight again, buying time for the rest to escape. Among them stands a new kind of soldier, the men of the 95th Rifles. Dressed in dark green instead of scarlet, armed with long-barreled rifles instead of muskets, they are the ghosts of the battlefield, accurate, silent, lethal. In the mountain passes, they pick off pursuing French officers with terrifying precision, their bullets spinning true through the freezing air. At Cacabelos, legend takes form. As French cavalry advance across the bridge, rifleman Thomas Plunkett drops to one knee, takes careful aim, and fires. A French general, Colbert, falls from his horse, shot clean through the head from nearly 400 yards away. Moments later, Plunkett calmly reloads and shoots another. It is the shot heard across the world, proof that courage and skill can humble even the empire of Napoleon. But valor cannot halt the march of winter. The retreat becomes a nightmare of hunger and despair. Villages are stripped bare. Men loot wine cellars, collapse drunk in the snow. The thin line between soldier and survivor blurs. Yet even as discipline frays, the rearguard's steady rhythm of musket fire echoes through the valleys, holding the French at bay. Bridges are blown, roads are mined, and every mile gained feels bought with blood. Behind them, Napoleon grows impatient. Reports of rebellion in Paris and Austria's mobilization reach him like distant thunder. Spain is no longer a triumph. It is a trap. On New Year's Eve, 1808, the emperor turns his horse northward, leaving Spain to his marshals. The chase is now in the hands of Marshal Soult, whose corps continues the pursuit with cold efficiency. The Grande Armée may have lost its master, but the hunt goes on. Ahead lies the Galician coast and the port of Corunna, the last hope of salvation. If Moore's army can reach the sea, the Royal Navy will take them home. If not, they will die on foreign soil. The blizzard begins to ease, but the cold lingers, in the air, in their bones, in the unshakable knowledge that they are fighting not for victory, but for survival. At last, the mountains give way to the Atlantic winds. On January 11, 1809, Sir John Moore's exhausted army reaches the coastal port of Corunna, mud-smeared, frostbitten, and starving, but alive. The sight of the sea lifts weary hearts. Beyond the bay, salvation glimmers, the Royal Navy. Yet fate, ever cruel, delays its mercy. Only a few ships ride at anchor, the rest scattered by winter storms. The British Army, trapped between ocean and enemy, must hold its ground until rescue arrives. Behind them, Marshal Soult's Second Corps closes in, its guns rumbling over the hills south of the city. Moore wastes no time. He orders his men to form defensive lines on the ridges above Corunna, stone walls, hedges, and olive groves serving as makeshift fortifications. Half his army digs in, the other half guards the road to the port. The terrain is rugged, broken, ill-suited for cavalry but perfect for a desperate defense. The soldiers know there will be no retreat from here. At 2 p.m. on January 16th, Soult opens fire. French cannon pound the British right flank, blasting gaps through stone walls and bodies alike. Then comes the infantry, gray-coated columns advancing through the smoke, drums rattling, bayonets fixed. Moore, calm amid the thunder, rides along the front line shouting encouragement. The 42nd Highlanders and 50th Foot meet the assault with volleys that shake the earth. Villages like Elvina and Piedralonga change hands several times, soaked in blood and gunpowder. The French attack with their usual discipline. The British respond with unflinching grit. Near the front, Moore himself directs reinforcements when a cannonball tears through his shoulder, shattering bone and flesh. He falls silently from his horse, pale but composed. "You must leave me," he whispers to his aides. "I hope my country will do me justice." Carried from the field, he listens to the fading roar of battle as darkness closes in. Around him, his soldiers fight on, not for orders, but for him. The French press hard, but General Hope, now in command, refuses to yield. The 95th Rifles skirmish along the flanks, their rifles cracking like whipcords. Paget's division strikes back on the right, rolling up Soult's attack. By nightfall, the French withdraw, leaving the ground littered with their dead. The British line still stands. Word reaches the dying Moore that his army has held. "I am satisfied," he murmurs, and dies shortly after, his face turned toward the sea. Through the night, the British work in silence, lighting decoy campfires as they withdraw toward the harbor. By dawn, the French discover empty trenches and find their enemy vanishing aboard ships under a cold January sky. Cannon fire from the hills crashes down too late. Most transports have already slipped beyond range. The army is saved, battered but unbroken. On a windswept hillside overlooking the bay, Sir John Moore is buried by lantern light, his grave marked only by stones and surf. The evacuation of Corunna is neither victory nor defeat. It is survival made sacred. Britain's army has escaped annihilation, and in doing so, has proven its mettle against the greatest power in Europe. For Napoleon, the Iberian Peninsula, once a mere sideshow, has become a wound that will not heal. And though the emperor will soon turn east to face Austria, the embers of Spanish resistance still burn bright, waiting for the next spark. When the guns fall silent at Corunna, the war in Spain is far from over. It has only changed shape. The French bury their dead among the smoking hills as the British fleet vanishes over the gray horizon. For Marshal Soult, the field is technically his, yet victory tastes of ash. The prey has escaped, and the cost is heavy. For the emperor in Paris, the campaign has bought nothing but grief. His first great army of Spain lies scattered, his brother's throne unsteady, and an entire nation burns beneath his rule. Napoleon, now drawn east to face Austria once more, leaves the Iberian Peninsula in the hands of his marshals, men brave but divided, brilliant yet arrogant. Each will chase his own share of glory through the hills and plains of Spain, yet none will ever truly tame it. The war that began as a swift invasion becomes a slow disease, a bleeding wound that drains the empire's strength year after year. The emperor himself will later call it "my Spanish ulcer." Across the countryside, the guerrilla war rages on. Priests still bless knives before ambushes. French couriers still vanish on lonely roads. For every victory France claims, a new revolt rises somewhere else. In the mountain monasteries of Catalonia, in the plains of La Mancha, in the sunburned hills of Andalusia, the spirit of rebellion endures. The peasants who once fled at the sight of imperial banners now hunt the hunters. The land itself becomes an enemy, swallowing columns whole. Meanwhile, Britain returns. In 1809, under a familiar name, Sir Arthur Wellesley, a new expedition lands in Portugal. Unlike Moore's retreat, this campaign will be fought to the finish. Wellesley learns from the land, from the people, and from the stubbornness of Spain itself. He fights with caution, patience, and method, qualities that will one day make him the Duke of Wellington. The war stretches on for 6 brutal years, drawing in hundreds of thousands of men, devouring fortunes, and sapping the pride of Napoleon's once invincible army. By the time the emperor returns from his disastrous campaign in Russia, the Peninsular War has already become a second front he can no longer afford. French troops are tied down across Spain, trapped between British offensives and endless uprisings. One by one, the fortresses fall. One by one, his veterans die far from home. And in 1813, at Vittoria, Joseph Bonaparte's fleeing carriage will be found abandoned amid the wreckage of another lost army. Inside lies a crown, gilded but hollow. Napoleon's dream of Spain shattered. Years later, in exile, the emperor will reflect on the folly of it all. "I embarked badly on this affair," he confesses. "The immorality showed too obviously. The injustice was too cynical. The whole of it remains very ugly." His words, perhaps his only unguarded admission of regret, linger as the final epitaph of the Spanish campaign. What began as a simple act of imperial will, a march to enforce a blockade, ended as a people's war that devoured an empire. Spain's defiance showed Europe that even the greatest conqueror could be humbled by faith, fire, and the will of the common man. From the stones of Madrid to the hills of Galicia, the cry still echoes, "Viva España!" The shout that turned Napoleon's empire into a bleeding wound that never truly healed.